If you hate your life and want to start over, this is your sign that you need an ego death. In this video, I'll explain in 8 minutes what an ego death is, why it's useful, and how to achieve it. Have you experienced an ego death? That is a title by a Forbes article written by Mark Travers. I found this particularly interesting because it breaks down multiple factors, like an ego death is helpful and also the ways people have experienced an ego death. First of all, what is an ego death, right? So let me break this down. So it is an intense transformation experience where individual temporarily loses their personal identity. Usually it's a false identity. It could be basically a performance, if you will, of your identity rather than your individual identity. So during an ego death, in this article, it goes through the fact that you experience a loss of control because you lose your sense of identity and your former thoughts and behaviors that didn't serve you. So it could be a frightening and liberating experience. The second thing that people experience is a transcendence of time and space, which basically means that your past, present, and future kind of merge into one. A lot of people say that depression is existing in the past, anxiety is thinking about the future. We've heard this before. And then being in the present is the healthiest way to think. Of course, it's easier said than done because those are usually a result of chemical imbalances, but this transcendence of time is important so that you can kind of release that stress related to accomplishing certain things at a certain time. And there's a spiritual experience usually because people feel this sense of rebirth in a sense. A lot of people will talk about ego deaths, but they don't really mention how it can help. A weak ego can hold you back in many ways. You could either have a strong ego or a weak ego. Let's say if you're trying to grow in your life, you don't like where you are at in life. I think many people could relate to this, and you want to grow. But your ego could hold you back in many ways. So it can hold you back by protecting your current identity and self-image. So it tells you a narrative of who you are. So anything that threatens it, even if it's an improvement of your current life, can threaten your that weak ego's existence. So it can make you think that you're appearing weak or foolish. Admitting past mistakes could be threatening to it. So you become in a state of defensiveness for the sake of protecting that fragile ego. The second thing is fear of vulnerability and failure, because the ego thrives in certainty and control. So when you're starting fresh and starting new, it makes you more vulnerable. And you're more prone to be threatened by failure if you have a weak ego because you're not used to failure. So any sort of past investment that you put in, it could be friendship, it could be the business that's not really going well, it could be the degree that, you realize later on that didn't serve you. Whatever the case may be, you're like, oh shoot, I'm already committed to it. So it creates this sunk cost fallacy. So you're like, oh, I've already committed to these friendships, I've already committed to these things that maybe no longer serve me, but I've invested time. So that could be threatening that as well. If you have a weak ego, you constantly need external validation. So this could be very difficult, especially for someone with a weak ego, because of the fact that external validation could be anything from that promotion, the awards, that getting into the college, whatever the case may be, right? If you have external validation, and if something does not work out externally, you kind of crack, right? Because you don't have that sense of internal fulfillment and internal confidence in yourself that you could try again, you could start over. And then the fifth thing is an illusion of control. The ego creates a false sense of control over everything. Sometimes it makes it difficult to accept the reality and to understand that maybe there's external factors that are outside of your control. So it's better to focus on what's in your control rather than trying to control something you can't control. One of the ways you can overcome this is by starting to have a beginner's mindset, to focus on the process rather than the outcome, and to practice being in the present. Because your ego thrives on these stories that you tell yourself, these narratives, etc., etc. So it's important to have that kind of mindset. For people especially who deal with insecurities, this can be really helpful and worth looking into, because going through an ego death allows you to reduce your self-focus. Like, it makes you break the cycle of over-identifying with your insecurities and kind of letting go of that insecurity, so you can have a more objective and more realistic view of yourself rather than being like overly critical. So this article also mentions the various ways people can experience an ego death. So it could be through psychedelic substances, which I highly do not recommend, because it is probably the most dangerous way to experience an ego death, but it does highlight that. But I think the more recommended practices it mentions is meditative states. Like, for example, if you experience an ego death during meditation, of course, meditation is a skill you have to practice, but focused intention, breath work, mindfulness, you can transcend your sense of self through that sense. The third way is spiritual practices. A lot of people experience ego death when they're experiencing certain spiritual practices, regardless of which religion they practice. Engaging in spiritual practices so that you can kind of connect to your surroundings. And it could be connecting with nature, connecting with community. And it gives a sense of dissociation from yourself. So it could be through the near-death experience, because this specifically creates a literal out-of-body experience, usually for a lot of people. So they kind of realize, like, oh wow, like, a lot of the things I thought were important are not actually that important, etc. Like, they experience a sense of fresh start that way. If, let's say, you got into a situation where that was external, like out of your control, in a near-death experience, usually people experience that way. So the healthiest way to go about it, I think, in my personal opinion, is the meditative practice, because meditation is obviously healthy. It's also important because it's a way of mental exercise. You can also experience a sense of clarity over your life, so can see what's an insecurity versus reality. It allows you to become less defensive over things and allow you to take criticism more clearly, just a sense of clarity overall. And the third way it can help is by giving you a sense of empowerment, because of the fact that you shift the focus away from external validation into internal validation, so you can have a stronger sense of self-love. A lot of the reasons why the ego could be problematic is because of the things that, when you're trying to grow, you have to get rid of certain false stories, false identities you've been carrying your whole life. So one of the major thing is like pride, for example, pride and self-image, right? If you're constantly fearing failure and constantly needing to protect your pride, it could be really a difficult situation to be in. And I specifically love the song Pride by Kendrick Lamar. Basically explaining the sense of state of defensiveness, avoidance. So yeah, it could be avoiding discomfort, avoiding conversations, protecting yourself from shame, etc. An ego death is definitely worth looking into. And if you are interested in a more thorough breakdown of an ego death, feel free to subscribe to my Patreon. It's only $3 a month. I would have made it one, but unfortunately Patreon does not have that option. But if not, and you still like the content, feel free to subscribe and share this with a friend. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll catch you on the next one.